Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills podcast, and today I've got Lauren Garner on with me. So Lauren, thank you very much for joining.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
So Lauren is a sports and exercise psychologist in training, and she's currently working with Sunderland first team as a psychologist, but has also background within academy sport. So Lauren is going to be chatting around her philosophy and currently what she's working with in terms of more of an acceptance approach in her practice, and also she's going to go into more around breathwork training. So Lauren, just want to give a little bit of background on your journey and then where you are now and what you're up to at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a sport and exercise psychologist in training. So I'm currently on the stage 2 training route, which is an applied professional doctorate. I'm doing that through Liverpool John Moores. I'm coming towards the end stages now. So I've been studying that for just over 4 years now. So we're almost done. We're getting close. And then through that, I suppose just talking a little bit about my background really is I entered into sport from a rugby background. So at the start of the doctorate, I was doing a couple of voluntary placements with a men's championship side. I then had a little bit of work with a women's Super League side, and I was doing some voluntary with some quite high level rowing as well. Journey into football started about a year into my training route. So I saw an academy job going with Blackburn Rovers as a part-time psychologist. I applied for that, went for a full assessment day. Had never experienced anything like it in my life. So I was there from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m, but it was fantastic. Probably one of the best assessment days / interviews I've ever had, if I'm honest, because it was very applicable and it was a very applied day. After about 6 months into that, I was then really, really fortunate to be offered the role full time. So then I was originally 9s to 16s and someone else was 18s to 21s. And when they moved on, I was really fortunate to take the role full time. So then I was 9s right through to 21s. I stayed at Blackburn for about 2.5 years and then moved on to Tottenham's Academy for a little while. So I did sort of 7 months there and then saw a first team role come up with Sunderland and thought it was silly to not go for it, if I'm honest. First team roles as a performance psychologist don't come up very often. So, and Sunderland's a huge, huge club. So I went for that, went through the interview process. And here we are. So I've been the first team performance psychologist for just coming up for 4 months now. And then other little bits that I've done in between in sport, I've done sort of private consultancy work and a little bit in gymnastics. I had quite an interest in esports contract on a short-term basis, a little bit of sort of academy women's football with a couple of goalkeepers and just odd little bits around that. Really, I've done some private work as like a consultant for a sports company. So bit of a mixed bag, really. So that sort of sums it up, really.
And we haven't really had anyone from a sports psychology perspective on the podcast before. So it'd be good to find out kind of what happens day to day in terms of your role at the moment. And does that change in terms of the academy stuff you've done with? So it'd be good to hear what kind of goes on within your role at the moment.
Yeah, I get asked a lot, to be honest, what does a day in the life look like as a performance psychologist in football? And honestly, every day is just so different. I'd say across a week, the bulk of my work at the moment will be involvement with, one-to-one sessions with first team players. So that's something performance related, different performance related sort of sessions that we do. We do really heavily use a performance profiling tool called Spotlight by a company called Mindflick, which is all about, it's a strengths-based approach. So each person fills in a questionnaire, they receive a performance profile where it looks at their performance preference. So it looks at how do you prefer to look at the world? How do you prefer to take action and go about things? And then it's sort of split into 3 parts where it's all about maximizing natural character strengths, adapting when those strengths become a weakness because they're coming overplayed, and then bringing that together so that we build adaptability. So I really like that tool. I never used it at an academy setting. So academy settings were a little bit different really in that I was at 2 Cat 1 academies and we had to do different sorts of profiling within there, but it's kind of on the psychologist to choose how they go about profiling their players, really. I always really like to go about it from a coach awareness point of view. So we profile the players, and it wouldn't have any standing in retain release, starting 11s or anything like that, because for me, I just don't see me being in a position to make those kind of decisions. I like to separate myself from that and give sort of coach awareness tools around, this is a little bit about this person. This is how they think. This is how they do. How can you get the best out of, each squad that you're working with? Um, so that's some of the one-to-one stuff that I've done, and that's how it sort of differs from an academy-based setting. In terms of group-based work, I'd say there's a lot more group-based stuff on an academy level. We make it quite small from a first team perspective. So rather than having a full squad session, what I tend to do is do smaller groups, whether that be position specific or sort of wanting to work with a specific set of people. We tend to keep it quite small so that we can sort of facilitate discussion a little bit more. Something that we're talking about in a workshop or a meeting might not be relevant to the entire squad. So we do tend to make it a little bit small, at least I do. I tend to make the work that I do with the squad a little bit different. And then one of the big things that I'm involved with that's different from an academy setting on a first team level is I'm involved in like the match day +1 or +2 recovery sessions as well. And that's where the breathwork comes in with my role at Sunderland. So very different, to be honest, depending on where we are in the week. Sometimes sessions are scheduled in. Sometimes we just do it sort of on a whim. It is, a gap in the schedule. And I think, well, there's 45 minutes there where I could, see how I can get the best out of this person. Then I'll approach and sort of say, do you want to sit and do some stuff? They facilitate it. So it's very varied. Whereas at an academy level, it tends to come from maybe a parent, a coach. It is very rare that a player themselves would actually want to engage, because I think there was just that, not lack of understanding, but maybe just a little bit of uncertainty about what sports psychology could do for them, really.
And I know we spoke up before this chat around your philosophy and how that has changed over time since you've been working. So could you just explain how your philosophy has changed and what kind of your main principles now that you're currently doing within Sunderland? So yeah, just want to go into a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, I'd say my philosophy now is it's probably only within the last, I'd say maybe 6 months or so, that I've actually been quite comfortable with my philosophy and got it to a point where I could probably actually describe it a little bit. I think when you're a very early stage sports psychology practitioner, philosophy is something that a lot of trainees do struggle with, because we're trying to figure out, okay, what type of psychology, what strand of psychology aligns with me and aligns with my values and helps me work from a place of congruence and feeling comfortable and not, I'm feeling like that this is right. This really, really aligns with me. So I've been through, I mean, that in itself is quite a journey, figuring that out. You're figuring out how to best help people. You're figuring out your style. Um, yeah, and it's taken some time, and it's constantly evolving as well. So, in a couple of years' time, it might look slightly different again. And then as I, become a more refined practitioner with the years, it'll probably continue to evolve. But where it stands right now, and approaches that I really align with and approaches that align with my values are acceptance-based approaches. So acceptance-based approaches, they're a little bit of a trend in the sports psychology community at the moment, but I think for good reason. The most common one at the moment that people tend to be utilizing and creating interventions with is something called acceptance commitment therapy. So it's basically something what we call a third wave approach. If we just go a little bit backwards, so to lead into that, we also have second wave approaches, and that will be your sort of traditional cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. So second wave approaches will typically identify unhelpful or maladaptive thinking and ways of dealing with emotions and try to sort of change them, try to maybe stop, remove, get rid of them, or, take a unhelpful or negative thought and try and reframe it basically into something else. So trying to change that person's thoughts or emotions or perception of a situation. For me and my own personal experiences just during my early 20s, and it just doesn't align with me. I really do think that, what we try to resist will persist and bite us. It'll catch up with us eventually. And what acceptance-based approaches try to do is, instead of changing a thought or instead of trying to change an emotion, acceptance-based approaches are, can you actually accept that this is a normal, natural part of the human experience? And instead of changing it, can you change your relationship towards it? So I think within football, and I'm sure other sports, we always hear this concept of you need to be able to control your emotions. And acceptance is all about letting go of control in a sense. Emotions on these things that we can just switch off and switch back on again when we are or we're not playing football. If you concede a goal, disappointment and frustration and sadness are normal. That's okay to feel that. If you make a mistake, feeling guilty, feeling bad about it, that's normal. That if you didn't have those emotions, you wouldn't be a fully functioning human being. So we can't just switch these things off. So from an acceptance-based point of view, instead of trying to control and fight and resist and get caught up in a metaphor that we use quite a lot in act-based approaches is trying to fight quicksand. So if you're stuck in quicksand and you're fighting and fighting and fighting, you end up sinking deeper and deeper and deeper. Whereas if you relax, you can then slowly get your way out of it. And it's a similar thing with emotions and unhelpful thoughts. So a common one is, I always like to use goalkeepers as an example with this is, conceded a goal, may have made a mistake and then conceded. And is that goalkeeper able to accept that that has happened and be able to refocus? And by accepting that it's happened, it doesn't mean that they're okay with it. It doesn't mean that they think that that's all right and that they don't care. What it shows is that they can accept that they can't change that now. And there's no point trying to figure out what happened right now. Still got however many minutes left in a game to go. So can I just put it to one side for now and be able to deal with the frustration and deal with the disappointment, because I've got a game to play here. I'm not going to wrestle with it. I'm not going to try and figure it out. I'm just going to park it for a minute. And then I might come back to it and then, digest it, because what you tend to see, especially with younger players, so I saw this a lot in an academy setting, is that they'd make a mistake and then you could just see that they're not here now. They're 10 seconds ago trying to figure out what happened, distracted, not in the present moment. You're now in the past. And it's that you can see them trying to figure out like what actually happened there. They're trying to break it apart, trying to digest it, trying to figure it out so that they don't repeat it. Again, that's normal. You don't want to make the same mistake twice in a football match. But actually, you're now distracted. You're not thinking about the match. You probably have no idea where the ball is. And then all of a sudden, the ball is right in front of you and you've got to react and be able to come back, and more mistakes end up getting made. And then you end up in that spiral again and down it goes. So acceptance helps people, as I say, change the relationship with the sort of the anger, the frustration, whatever it may be. And instead of trying to get rid of it, they accept that that's a normal part of being a human. It's a normal part of sport massively. Things can be up and down within seconds in a game like football. Can I accept that this has happened? Can I sit with the anger, with the frustration, and understand that I'm having a natural human response? But can I still perform despite those emotions being present? So yes, I'm angry. Yes, I'm frustrated. Yes, I'm disappointed. Can I still perform despite that? Absolutely. So instead of trying to get rid of that disappointment and instead of trying to, squash it, not think about it, actually, can you just let it be? Let it sit there and still do your task on whatever position it is that you're playing. So it helps them, rather than control their emotions, it helps people manage their responses to them and still perform despite their presence.
Does that approach apply with, let's say, the highs of the moment? So obviously, maybe adrenaline, or maybe someone scored a goal, for example, then they've got to reset and concentrate on the rest of the game. Does that approach apply to those high moments as well?
Absolutely. Because, you could be 2-0 up in a game You're on the high of emotion. You're excited. Everything's going really well. But then can you become complacent and switch on a little bit and think that you've got it in the bag? Potentially. Yeah. We do see teams who are up end up losing games or drawing. Is it because you switched off? There's so many things at play. So it won't just be that, and the other team could change formation, could change tactically. There's so many different things that are happening within that situation, but is a small percentage of it that you thought you had it and you thought, we've got this, whether that was consciously or unconsciously as well. You might not be totally aware of that, but if you come away and 48 hours later, sit down and I go, did you switch off? Maybe, did you get complacent? Were you becoming emotionally driven in a different way? So rather than disappointment, anger, or frustration driving your actions, is complacency. Are you too calm at that point? Have you sort of come down the other side of it where the pleasant emotions are now sort of going, I can take my foot off the gas a little bit. So yeah, absolutely.
And with this approach, it may be quite daunting for players to open up and accept maybe their anger or whatever emotion they're going on rather than trying to fight it, control it. So what sort of strategies has worked well for you in trying to work with these players on your acceptance approach, as you mentioned?
Yeah. So every intervention is completely different, but what acceptance-based approaches, specifically ACT, will do is there are 6 different components and it's called the hexaflex. So you work through different parts of that, and you don't need to start in any particular place. You can start absolutely anywhere. So what we typically start with is with any intervention or any player support, we'll sit and do a needs analysis. And that needs analysis could be 1 session to however many you need to do to really get a full picture, a well-rounded picture of what's going on, what were you thinking in that moment, what were you feeling, how did that influence your actions? And we try to, as best as we possibly can, understand what is going on at that moment, what is the challenge that this person is facing. So we spend some time doing that. Once we have a clearer picture as to where that person might need to do a little bit of work, we then start looking at the hexaflex and where we may want to sort of start. One place I quite like to start before the hexaflex, and I use this as my needs analysis, is using something called the choice point. And it's a part of ACT where you write down a situation that's occurring to that person. So let's go back to that goalkeeper situation. Made a mistake, conceded a goal, we lost the game 1-0. So off the back of that situation, we then sort of go, okay, so what is it that you want support with after that? Is this something that's commonly occurring? So they might go, after that goal, I just couldn't get it out of my head, couldn't stop thinking about it. I just wasn't there in the game. I was distracted, not in the moment anymore. And then I kept making more mistakes. And then the more mistakes I was making, the more frustrated I was getting. So we pick up the situation. What was it that happened? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? So then you write down some of the thoughts that they may have been having and some of the emotions that they were having. That. So you break it down, situations, thoughts, emotions. You then draw 2 arrows away from the situation, one going to the left, one going to the right. I always focus on the left side and I say that's the emotionally driven path. And that takes us away from the type of performer that we want to be, or it takes us away from the actions that we might want to demonstrate despite making that mistake and conceding. So on that emotionally driven route, what we then say is, have you become hooked by your emotions? And the sort of official term within ACT is fused. So have you become fused with your thoughts and with your emotions? And are you now becoming emotionally driven? So we write away at the top. When you're hooked, what away moves do you make? And by away moves, what are the observable behaviors? So a question I like to ask in that situation is, I say, if I was stood at the side of that game and I was watching you after you made that mistake and you conceded that goal, if you were becoming emotionally driven and your emotions, your frustration, your disappointment and your anger were driving you, or your sadness, whatever, your guilt, whatever it may be, what would I see? And it might be things like I go quiet and I don't communicate. It might be my body language has completely changed. I'm low, I'm slow. I just look distracted. You can just tell that I'm not there. I continue to make more mistakes because I'm not focused. So this is what it looks like when your emotions are in the driving seat. What might you do or not do? Then we flip it and sort of go, okay, if you were able to unhook from your emotions and separate from them, and you were not becoming emotionally driven, and you were able to just let those emotions be, but still perform, what actions or what behaviors would I see despite you making that mistake? And it essentially be the polar opposite. Still communicating with my team. I'm still staying focused. I'm communicating with the back line. I'm shouting when I think that information that I might need to shout, that'll be man on, shoulder, turn, whatever it may be. My body language is still big and strong. I don't look like it's hurt me. I essentially look unfazed. So, and we say those are towards moves, moving towards the type of performer you want to be, or towards the behaviors that you want to demonstrate following that situation, the thoughts and the emotions. So what we've sort of got at that point is then going, well, this is what you're doing. This is where you want to be. And then we work from that point of view into the hexaflex then. And through the conversations, we then may start at one of the sections of the hexaflex is values. And in ACT, what we say is the way to go from being hooked and making away moves to becoming unhooked and making towards moves is that is the value-driven path. Instead of your emotions in the driver's seat and your emotions driving what you're doing, can you lean more so into your values and stay committed to them to be able to behave or act in a way that's going to be conducive to performance rather than a decline in performance? We could start somewhere else where one of the sections of ACT is self as context. In a really simple way of describing that, it's essentially understanding that thoughts come and go, emotions come and go. Thoughts are just thoughts. You are not your thoughts. Thoughts are something that you have, and teaching people that they pass. And again, we love metaphors in acceptance-based approaches. So there are things like we talk about clouds in the sky. So self as context could be, you are a nice, clear blue sky. You're just the blue sky. But sometimes the weather changes. Sometimes there's a few clouds in the sky. Sometimes it might be overcast and foggy. Other times it may be super, super stormy and things are, the weather is terrible. But the weather always comes and goes, and we link that back to thoughts and emotions. They will always come and go. It will pass. So we help sort of sit within that. And there's, like I said, there's 6 different parts of ACT that you'd work through. So I understand there's going to be a lot of coaches that are probably going to watch this, and they wouldn't need to do that. But that's typically how a psychologist may work through it. Part of it. Obviously, to sit and talk about the entire 6-step process is probably a whole different podcast in itself, if I'm honest. Typically, it's the underpinning thing is, can we help this individual perform to the optimal level that we need them to perform at when it really matters under pressure, despite unpleasant emotions, despite unpleasant thoughts. And as you say, on the flip side of that, can they continue to perform optimally despite feeling calm or, complacent? Can they recognize that as well? So in a nutshell, it's all about being able to perform, even when you're having mostly an uncomfortable experience. But as we say, it can go into the complacency side as well.
And obviously this isn't going to happen overnight in terms of a player to change their mindset. So how involved are you as a practitioner within the actual training sessions? Are you, let's go with the goalkeeper, are you by their maybe session a couple of times and trying to talk them through their processes, or do you have regular sessions that you might drip feed things throughout?
Yeah, it varies, to be honest. I don't have any say in training sessions or anything like that. I observe training. I get out as much as I can, as many as possible. I'd say I observe probably about 80% of training sessions and get out and watch them. I don't have any say in those training sessions, but if I go out and observe, it's then something we can talk about within a session with the person, and the same with games. I like to get to as many as I possibly can, and that is way easier at a first team level than it is working across an academy, because I'm not 9 to 21s, and that, if I've got a player from each age group that I'm working with in an academy, how do you go and watch all of those games? So it was really, really tough to do that at an academy level. But from a first team perspective, let's say, yeah, I think observing and seeing how people react in certain situations gives us really good talking points. So we could be working on something like this. And it may be a case of, I've watched them in the game and sort of gone, I've noticed this, what was going on in that moment, or I noticed that what was going on in that moment. So should it come to a point where, I end up working with, let's say, one of our goalkeepers, in the example I gave was from an academy setting, but, if the same situation popped up for one of our goalkeepers, then yeah, I'd take a similar approach. And one of the things I did at an academy level when I was working with one of the goalkeepers was giving them little tools in between sessions as well. So like understanding their triggers, understanding, because one of the things of ACT is self-awareness as well. Are you actually consciously aware of how you're feeling in that moment and recognizing that you're distracted? So again, it's not an overnight fix. But one of the things that I used to use quite a lot was like something called 5-second rule. And I actually used to hear this from some of the older group coaches across academy settings, sort of saying 5-second rule, recover, 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 following something happening. And I really liked it, but I wasn't really hearing it at the lower age groups. I thought I'm gonna pinch that for some psychology related work. And then that was essentially what the discussions I was having with that goalkeeper that I was working with was following a mistake. In the first 5 seconds following that mistake, can you have a helpful response rather than an unhelpful response? And it's a bit of a trigger to sort of go, I need to get back in this, rather than drifting off. We're doing all the acceptance work underneath, but in the moment, 5-second rule, boom, can you come back and have a helpful response? Whether that is just encouraging your teammates, whether that's accepting that it's happened and not beating yourself up and not getting distracted, whatever a helpful response that's going to help your performance or the team's performance moving forward after that mistake, can you do that? But we work again on being able to do that. So that was just a bit of like a trigger in the moment for them to take something away, but then we work on that underneath with it in those sessions that are off the pitch.
And is this approach apply across like you said, when you work with the academy and the younger players, so do you go around the same approach when working with youth players the same with the first team players, or is there slightly different ways you go around this?
Yeah, it's definitely slightly different depending on the age of the individual, really. So everything I do is underpinned by acceptance, but the language that you use, if you're working with an under 9 and that's an 8-year-old child, the way you talk about it is going to be very, very, very different to how you work with a 24-year-old. When you're working with sort of older players who are, at a first team level, our team's quite young, so that might be someone at 17 years old, especially across certain clubs who really like to homegrown their own players and then sort of, move them over into the first team. But it really does vary depending on the age of the individual. I think older players can comprehend a little bit, a lot more. You can have that really in-depth work, that really back and forward, and it can be very player-led, the session as well. I really like the person in front of me to lead the discussion in a lot of ways, and then I sort of follow. So I sort of see myself as a little bit of a guide and then work off what they're saying. Whereas if you're sitting with an under 9 and under 10, they just tend to be a little bit shyer as well. And you just make suggestions and work things in. So you have to be really adaptable as a practitioner and recognize that you can't work with one age group the same way you'd work with another, but you also can't work with one person the same way that you'd work with another. You could have 2 people in the same age group and have to take slightly different approaches as well. So it's really being able to recognize and understand people as well. But that comes with time and getting to know each person that you're working with as well.
And as many sports coaches shall listen to this, is there any ways that they can start to facilitate some sort of acceptance-based approaches into their training? So is there any ways they could start to maybe talk around this with their athletes or do any sessions or stuff?
Yeah, so I think a really, really simple way, as I say, I'd never say to any football coach or sports coach, you need to go and do an ACT qualification or, become a psychologist. But I do think that coaches have way more potential to influence way more people than a sole psychologist. You take an academy setting, for example, and there could be from 9 to 21s, 200 players. How is a psychologist going to be able to get through all of those people? But if you can work with coaches and then the coaches work with their squads, then all of a sudden you're having a sort of trickle down effect, really, where you're able to influence a lot more players through the coaches and having conversations with them. I think a lot of it probably comes down to language used. As I say, we tend to say across sport, you need to control your emotions. Actually, do you just need to manage your response to the emotions? Can you have, so I really like the words helpful and unhelpful rather than good, bad, positive, negative. But a lot of the language I used to use, especially with younger players, was following a mistake. Can you manage your response to that mistake and have a helpful response to it rather than an unhelpful one? And encouraging coaches to have discussions with their squads of, okay, what would be an unhelpful response to that? Again, what would I see you do or not do? What would be some of the behaviors there? Okay, what would a helpful response be? What would I see you do? What would you, how would you act? What would your performance look like in the moments following that mistake? Encouraging helpful over unhelpful and just slightly changing the language. But then also praising and recognizing that, if you've got a player where every time they make a mistake, it really affects them and their performance deteriorates. And then you start working on them with having helpful responses over unhelpful, and then praising that when you see it and sort of saying you've come a really long way. I can see you making really, really good progress there. And encouraging reflection on what happened after a match. So I always follow up as well. So around like reflection when I do act-based work as well, and acceptance-based work around people make mistakes and they tend to get caught up in that moment. That's not the time to sit and digest what happened. As I say, you've got so many minutes left within that game and you've still got to be able to perform. So can you let it be, put it to one side? You can then come back to that later and digest it. So you've accepted what's happened in the moment. You're accepting the unpleasant or unhelpful emotions. Let's say you've been able to have a really helpful response and you've performed in a way that you want to. So you've made towards moves. You're unhooked and you're performing how you said you wanted to perform. The next day, there's no harm in coming back to that mistake, clipping it, using Huddle to clip it, and then breaking it down and sort of going, right, what actually happened there? Now the emotions are a little bit settled as well. I've had a bit of space from it. What happened there, and breaking it down and figuring it out when you're away from the situation of the game, you're away from the pressure, you've calmed a little bit, you've sort of regulated your emotions a little bit at that point. You've slept on it, you've taken some time, and you can zoom out and take a little bit more of a bird's eye view of it as well and everything that led up to it. So acceptance doesn't mean put to one side, get complacent and forget. It means that you recognize that now's not the time to really get caught up in something that's just happened. Put it to one side. Can you manage your response to the emotions? Can you still sustain performance? Absolutely. Like I said, it doesn't happen overnight, but yes, with practice and work, 100%. And then the day after, can you then come back to it and not see, teams do analysis, but that doesn't mean that player can't do their own clips as well and digest it and have a conversation with their coach separately away from that team analysis or that unit analysis as well. So there's just so much that you can do. So probably a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'd definitely say language, how you sort of help players respond to their emotions, unhelpful or helpful, and then encouraging reflection, but not on the same day, maybe the day after.
So I just want to talk about one of the strategies that you mentioned around breathwork. So how does breathwork align with the acceptance approach that you've just spoken around? And you mentioned this involves, after a match day?
Yes. So if I start on sort of like the recovery side of things, really. So some of the work I do, if we're in match day +1, we'll do a recovery session. If it's a day off after the match, the next day, match day +2, we'll do recovery. So post performance, they do a lot of recovery, but gym based, pool recovery, ice baths, all of the standard stuff that, a lot of football clubs engage with. But what we've started to do this season is breath work as well. So to keep it very short and sweet, breathwork has lots of different potential benefits, whether that's breathwork for becoming more focused, whether it's breathwork for managing nerves and anxiety. I really like breathwork for recovery. So what we do with that is I'm teaching them breathwork techniques that will help more oxygen uptake within their blood. So a lot of people think if you breathe more, it's better. Breathing more is actually bad because we end up wasting a lot of that oxygen and it doesn't actually get into the bloodstream. So we use breathwork techniques to be able to build tolerance to carbon dioxide, actually breathe less so that the oxygen that you are taking in is more efficiently utilized. So then it travels into the blood. You have a better oxygen supply to your muscles that will then help reduce inflammation and help with healing and recovery after a big game and putting your body under so much fatigue. It also helps the nervous system down regulate. So we target it from a relaxation point of view as well. So, the lead into the game, everything's getting sort of pent up and pent up and pent up. You start getting into that fight or flight response, adrenaline kicks in. During the game, you are very much so on adrenaline. You're fueled by it. Coming after a game, we tend to find that whether it's football or other sports, we tend to find that athletes tend to struggle with sleep post performance. So then it affects sleep. And then you're still in that fight or flight response the day after as well. So your body's trying to recover. So the other side of that is we use breath work to then down regulate the nervous system, relax, just take 15 to 20 minutes to breathe, let's say. So officially using oxygen, promoting recovery, promoting relaxation, and then teaching people some sleep breathing techniques as well. So after a game, when you're in bed, can you start implementing these techniques to down regulate in bed rather than down regulating the next day or the day after that when we do our recovery session? So that's where I use it quite a lot at the moment. I'm going to be, well, I'm currently involved in a project. It's in very early stages at the moment, but we want to use breath work to sort of help with recovery times as I already am, readiness to train, stress management, regulating mood and enhancing performance. So the enhancing performance side is, are you breathing functionally or dysfunctionally? A lot of people actually breathe dysfunctionally. So they breathe through the mouth, especially under fatigue. If you see someone who's done a lot of running and then all of a sudden you can see them breathing in and out through the mouth wasn't designed for breathing, nose was. So you're now not taking an optimal amount of oxygen in if you're taking your air in through your mouth because it's not designed for that. Your mouth is designed for talking, eating, drinking, not breathing. The nasal cavity is biologically designed for breathing. So some of the work that we're going to be doing, and there's already a couple of great people out there that do this, is helping athletes breathe optimally, breathe functionally, whether that's at rest and under fatigue. Because again, when you breathe in and out of your mouth, you're actually then, when you breathe out, you're expelling water, a lot more water than you are out your nose as well. So then you're contributing even more significantly to dehydration. And there's a really easy way that you can test this. If you get a phone screen and you put it under your nose and you breathe heavily out your nose, there'll be two small circles on there with water vapor. If you then heavily breathe out of your mouth onto your phone, the whole phone screen will be covered. So it just shows how much more water you're actually losing and dehydrating yourself. If you do that for 90 minutes in and out of your mouth, you end up dehydrating yourself. That then has a negative effect on performance and down the spiral goes really. So breathwork is something I'm relatively new to myself. Used basic breathing techniques at an academy setting for sleep, but within the last sort of like 3 to 4 months, I've really, really taken an interest in it. The way that links to acceptance-based approaches, just to go back to what you asked initially, was football and sport is it can be quite challenging as a sports psychologist because athletes want something tangible now. I want a fix to this experience that I'm having right now. So a common one is nerves or anxiety. I get really, really nervous before a game, struggling. I feel like I'm going to be sick. Some people might be sick, when nerves, especially young players, we see that's quite common because the nerves get to them quite a lot and they want something there and then. And sometimes when you say, let's do this acceptance-based approach, and can you sit with that anxiety and can you sit with those nerves and accept them, perform with them? And it will get a little bit easier. You'll be able to manage your response to them. You'll be able to change your relationship to them, but it might take a little bit of a while. I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want to feel better going into the game. I need something now. So breathing techniques are something that I think are really, really useful for treating the symptoms of certain emotions. So let's go back to anxiety, the increased heart rate, feeling tense, increased breathing rate, the feeling in the belly or the tightness in the chest. Can you, what we call anchor in the present moment? So using the breath as an anchor, stop, come to now and control your breathing. Let's slow everything down. Let's somewhat down regulate that nervous system. We can't down regulate it too much because you've got a game to play. So we don't need to completely switch off, but we need to get it to a point where you're not tipping over the edge, where the anxiety becomes a hindrance rather than a help. Some nerves are healthy. Some nerves are good. It means that, you're ready. Your senses are heightened. So it's getting people to that sort of nice middle point where some nerves are good and it's that arousal for being ready to go in and perform, but not down regulating with breathwork to the point where you're just too chill, but also managing it to the point where, you're not vomiting and you're not having a panic attack before a game, or, even if it doesn't go as far as a panic attack, or you feeling it to a point where it might hinder your performance. So breathwork and breathing techniques can really, really help manage those feelings and those emotions and those thoughts. And it treats the symptoms, the surface level stuff. But I think it's still important to do all of the work underneath that as well. So it gives individuals something tangible, something where they can feel immediate relief and help. But can we do the underpinning work as well, rather than just constantly trying to breathe through it? Actually, where does this anxiety come from? Why is it so debilitating? What thoughts are you having? Are there, previous experiences that we need to explore? Do we need to educate a little bit? Do we need to do some psychoeducation? Going into the acceptance piece, leaning into values. And there's different ways to do that. There's different strands of acceptance-based approaches depending on age as well. There are simpler ways to do it. So there's a recent one that's come out called DNAV, which is designed, it can be used with adults, but I think it's very, very good for adolescents because it uses cartoon characters. And one's called like the discoverer, the noticer, the advisor, and it just makes it a little bit more young person friendly. So I again, depending on the age, it would be how I'd use that method. Yeah, I think that the two can link nicely because you're helping with the symptoms, but you're working on that underpinning work and all of the things that person's experiencing at the same time.
I just want to go into one of the examples you mentioned there, just to finish off on around, you mentioned around managing the anxiety, and you can maybe go through some breath work there. So what would you go through certain times, or would you talk them through how to maybe breathe properly, or would you talk them through sort of mindset stuff whilst they are breathing? So yeah, just want to go into a bit more detail onto that.
Yes. So it really depends on the situation, I suppose. If it is, let's say, nerves before a big game, some of the breath work, it'd be super, super simple. So one of the most common ones that probably most people have heard of is box breathing. So breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 4 seconds, breathe out through the nose for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. And you imagine a square going around. So it's in, hold, out, hold, making sure that you're doing it with the nose. A lot of people tend to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. With breath work, it's always encourage nasal breathing at all times, in and out. So you could teach a really simple technique of, before a game, can you sit just for 5 minutes, practicing some box breathing, calming the nerves, bringing everything down, helping yourself feel better. So that's a sort of maybe a pre-performance breathwork technique. When we're looking at during performance, the breathwork techniques would then be more so around functional breathing. So again, nasal breathing, breathing functionally, not mouth breathing, being able to nasal breathe under fatigue. Again, it takes practice. But again, preventing things like excessive dehydration, being able to maximize efficient oxygen uptake to your muscles, because when the muscles are working, they need oxygen to function, helping the red blood cells travel around the body. So, and helping, transport other vitamins and things to the muscles when they're needed. The other interesting thing about the nose is that its nitric oxide is only produced in the nose. And what that does is it helps sort of clean and sterilize the lungs as well to enhance optimal breathing. So there's lots of functions to the nose. There's more than 30 of them. But that would be during performance, under exercise, under fatigue. And then afterwards, some of the breathwork stuff that could then be around optimal recovery and nervous system down regulation to the point where you don't need to be up at all. The game's been and gone. Can we just relax a little bit? So it's different breathwork techniques for different time points, really.
And then just to finish off on, you mentioned you're doing a bit of research within breathwork. So just want to chat a little bit around what your kind of main aims or what you're looking to get out of that.
Yeah, so we want to pair breathwork with football on a really big scale. There's not really anybody doing this at the moment. Where we want to be able to go around various, clubs and be able to do some research there, figuring out sort of what the benefits of breathwork could be for football players, whether they see it being a benefit, how can it help, teaching them the benefits that we already know, making it really, really science and research backed. So we want to do research in that area to understand the effects and the impact that breathwork techniques have on football players specifically. So there's a big team of us, and we're going to be doing lots of different roles and responsibilities within the research process, but we want to better understand what are positive implications of breathwork in football. How can this help football players perform optimally? Because football is such a tightly competitive sport, and even if you can just have it's marginal gains, isn't it? Even if you can have that 1% of your opposition, why wouldn't you take it? So we're really interested to see what the positive effects of breathwork in football can be, and then how can we provide that to footballers.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to see the outcome of that because I think, and again, you mentioned you're doing a lot of it in football, and I think it would transfer to a lot of different sports as well in terms of the strategies that you might come up with there.
Yes, absolutely. We want to sort of, I'm in the job that I'm in because I want to help people. And I get a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment for helping people. I love helping people. I love sport. I love football. So if I can bring all of those things together and just have a positive impact on as many people as possible, help them through their journey, job done for me. That's where my happiness comes from, is just helping other people. But being able to do that in sport is just such a privilege. And being involved in, say, if I'm just 1% of someone's journey, but I've left them with just one small little thing that helps move them forward and helps them manage a situation or helps improve their performance and other well-being. And because there's lots of well-being work that's all intertwined within this as well. It's not all just performance. I think that well-being needs to be there as well. And again, breathwork can help with that. Acceptance-based approaches can help with that. And there are many, many, many other approaches that are helpful. It's just these just align with me, my philosophy, and how I prefer to work. So it's not that any other approach is wrong. As I say, it comes back to that personal, professional philosophy piece around what aligns with you, what aligns with your values and your life experiences, and helps, you as a practitioner be able to work in a way that's congruent and where you feel aligned, really. And I'm sure it's the same with coaching. Coaches have a coaching philosophy. Other staff will have philosophies on how they work, whether it's S&Cs, medical staff. We all operate from a place of what aligns with me. So I think it's really, really important. So as I say, that's just my preferred approach. Lots of psychologists out there who operate in a similar way, a very, very different way. But ultimately, it all just comes down to putting the individual at the center of everything and trying to help them and give them a positive experience.
Thank you, Lauren. And if anyone's got any questions or wants to chat a little bit further around some of the stuff you're doing, is there any way people can get in touch or see maybe some of the research that might come out at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the best place to get me is probably LinkedIn. So just searching my name on there, Lauren Garner, you'll be able to find me. And I try to get back to messages as much as I possibly can. I do get a lot of messages and I try to spend, at least one day a week trying to get to people. Sometimes it is really difficult because there's so many people who want to work in football and you just get message after message. But I'd say that's probably the best place at the moment. Yeah, LinkedIn.
And I'll pass on any questions as well. But Lauren, thank you very much for chatting. There's some really good insights and something different that we haven't really spoken about before. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description. And we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.